It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. It's the mother of all talk shows. Go get 'em, George.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Little Soldier Schultz and a bareback, your boys took a hell of a beating. The collapse of the center, the Zelensky curse, strikes again in Germany. And remember the Lebanese resistance? They haven't gone away, you know. And Keir Starmer declares war on Russia and the United States in one single statement today when he declares that Ukraine will join NATO. Oh, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in the Oval Office when Starmer creeps in to see his master, Donald Trump, in the next few days. It's all coming up here tonight on the mother of all talk shows. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
First, forgive me if I take this opportunity, because she's overseas with our daughters, to wish a happy birthday to my good wife, Gayatri. She will be on the show later. Thank you, Gayatri, for everything. You brought sunshine on Leith into my life. And I want to remember the death of our good friend Gonzalo Lira, who we thought was dead and buried as a story, but who has now become the subject of major international discourse and maybe a very significant role in what happens next in Ukraine. Gonzalo Lira was a good friend of ours, and we were amongst the very few good friends of his. People rubbished him, people doubted him, but we always trusted him. And we featured him over and over and over again on the mother of all talk shows. And in fact, he remains the biggest view count of any of our guests. That's how significant a man he was to this show and to the international audience that saw right from the start 3 years ago that all was not what we were being told it was in the battle in Ukraine. Gonzalo Lira was murdered by President Zelensky. When he was asked that today by a journalist, he laughed. But he may not be laughing for long, because the Vice President of the United States is now highlighting how it came to be that an American citizen, a journalist, a blogger, was able to be incarcerated, tortured, and murdered by the United States' closest ally, to whom the United States was giving hundreds of billions of dollars. More of that later. How it came to pass that Joe Biden's embassy in Kiev did jack shit to help a man whom it was their duty to assist. They sat by and may even have given the wink to the murderer Zelensky to kill our good friend Gonzalo Lira. Elon Musk on Twitter, a very powerful man indeed, is now constantly highlighting the fact that Zelensky murdered an American journalist, Gonzalo Lira. Now, of course, we wish that everyone who is now preoccupied by this case had been at all preoccupied by it when it was still possible to save Gonzalo Lira's life. We were the people, and very few others, who beseeched the American government, the Chilean government, any government that could or would, to come to the rescue of this outstanding and brave figure. But nobody was listening then, but they are listening now. And so, posthumously, it may very well be that Gonzalo Lira features large, not as life, for he is dead, but large in the immediate future relations between the United States and the Ukraine. But first to Germany. Little soldier Schultz and Anna Baerbock, the foreign minister, could not have been closer to Zelensky. Well, they could have, I suppose, although we never know what goes on behind closed doors. But certainly, they embraced him with all of their hearts. And they've gone the way of so many others who have similarly embraced the deadly Zelensky in the last 3 years. The truth is that Baerbock and Schultz did more concretely, practically, to fuel this disastrous war, which has killed well over 1 million people, hundreds of thousands on the Russian side, 1 million and more on the Ukrainian side, and has cost all of us in treasure an uncountable amount of money. The dislocation that this war has caused in world affairs will be felt for 50, maybe 100 years from now. It is as cataclysmic in its way, in its impact on international relations, than any event since the Second World War. It was the German Chancellor then, Angela Merkel, who guaranteed the Minsk II agreement, along with President Hollande, if you remember him, of France, if you remember them. Merkel and Hollande guaranteed that the Minsk II agreements would be implemented, but they both lied and have since admitted it. They have both admitted that Minsk II was a hoax, was a canard, it was a conspiracy against the peace. And as it's turned out, a conspiracy against the people of Germany and France, not to mention the Ukraine and Russia, and indeed more widely too. Merkel and Hollande, if they had been genuine, would have avoided having a war in the Ukraine at all. Minsk II committed the Ukrainian government to autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions of the country, and no membership of NATO. Precisely the things that would have stopped this war, would have avoided the loss of at least 1/3 of Ukraine's territory, would have avoided the loss of at least 1.25 million people, would have avoided the wreckage of the economies of the belligerent NATO countries. The wreckage which came home to roost, though not as clearly as it should have, in the elections in Germany today. Since little Schulz came to power, he's been funneling money and weapons and diplomatic support and propaganda rhetoric and cracking down on the freedoms of the people of Germany like there was no tomorrow. But certainly tomorrow does not belong to him. He has plunged the SPD, the Labour Party equivalent, take note, Keir Starmer, in Germany to its lowest vote in the entire history of German democracy. Barely 15% of the electorate voted to re-elect their Prime Minister. It is an astounding low for a party that was once the natural party of government in the German Republic. This is the party of Willy Brandt. This is the party of Gerhard Schroeder. This is the party which dominated post-war German politics for so long. And it has crashed and burned, and it has completely deserved to. To my astonishment, Baerbock's party actually did extremely badly, down almost 10%, but that 14% of the German electorate thought that Anna Baerbock was the answer. That greenery and quackery and wokery and the whole trans agenda was the answer for Germany in its dark hour. Well, frankly, that astounds me. But as I've been saying on here for quite some time, if you put both of these governing parties together, you don't get anywhere near 30% of the vote. And they are now out. Except that the party which has won the election, the CDU, the Conservative Party equivalent in Germany, is no better at all than the outgoing coalition of Schulz and Baerbock. Sound familiar? Sound familiar to you? This two cheeks of the same arse? This false dichotomy which is presented to voters in Britain, in France, in Germany, and other places in Western Europe too. Does it sound familiar that the only way you can kick out the incumbent government is to elect a government which is as bad, if not worse, than the outgoing coalition? And that is, of course, exactly what happened in Britain on the 4th of July last year. Nobody in their right mind could have voted to re-elect little Rishi Sunak, but the choice was him or Starmer, because the entire electoral process is completely rigged in Germany as in France. The German Nationalist Party, AfD, whose vote doubled in this election, but fell well short of being in the running for a coalition place, it was forgotten by the German state broadcaster in their final roundup on the eve of poll. Of the state of the parties, they forgot to mention the AfD, which doubled its vote and came in second in this election in Germany today. Sarah Wagenknecht, my own choice, if I had one, if I was a voter in Germany, was completely blanked out of the entire election. No debates, no television coverage, no national opinion poll mentioned her. And I've got my fingers crossed that she'll cross the 5% barrier and be in the new German parliament. The parade of transvestites called Die Linke got nearly 15% of the vote. So you can tell that there's still a lot of liberals in Germany. And those that are not liberals are not prepared to vote for anyone that will actually make a difference. And so the downward slide of the powerhouse of Europe, the most important country in Europe, continues and will continue. And as our guest from Germany, former candidate from Hamburg, told us, I think on Wednesday's show, if not last Sunday's, he told us, actually, they'll just all stay in government. None of them can govern on their own. Of course, the leader of the CDU, MOATS, a former BlackRock executive, yes, BlackRock, he'll be the chancellor, but Schulz and Baerbock will be back as junior partners in a new coalition. Before we had a traffic light coalition, now we have the Afghan flag. Work it out for yourselves. So Germany's crisis will continue unabated. Germany's warmongering will continue unabated. Germany's slide into complete irrelevance in world affairs will continue. And the economic wreckage and the multiple social crises that have accompanied it will, of course, also continue. So expect to see trouble in Germany ahead. Now, when Israeli Air Force dropped 80 tons of explosives on the head of the leader of the Lebanese resistance, Said Hassan Nasrallah, they probably hoped that that would be the end of the matter. When the resistance was forced by the Lebanese government, not that the Lebanese government could have forced them, but force majeure in that the resistance did not want to create a civil war in Lebanon, which they would have won and would have toppled the other powers in the state in an afternoon, but they have never and do not want to do that. So they agreed to a ceasefire. And in that ceasefire, during that ceasefire, which was broken by Israel more than 1,500 times and was broken again in South Lebanon today, we kept being told, all the most educated fools in the Western polities and mass media, that the resistance was over. They had been decapitated. They had been effectively disarmed, and that they were potentially so weak that they could be pushed out of Lebanese politics in total. Well, they didn't budget on 1.4 million Lebanese people turning up for Hassan Nasrallah's funeral in Beirut today. 1.4 million people in a country of less than 5 million people. That sounds like a pretty healthy share of the vote for the Lebanese resistance to me. This, despite the fact that there was every possibility that Israel could have dropped bombs on 1.4 million people. They flew fighter, bomber, aircraft over the funeral repeatedly and dropped bombs in the south of Lebanon as hundreds of international journalists were gathering for a funeral. But 1.4 million people turned out in support of the late leader of the Lebanese resistance. So I'm going to make a not all that bold prediction here. You have not heard the last of the resistance in Lebanon. That leaves me time only to deal with the latest lunacy of Sir Keir Starmer, who is doubling down on his conflict, not just with Putin, but now with Donald Trump. Trump has made clear Ukraine, what's left of it, at the end of this conflict, will never join NATO. But Keir Starmer says today, on the eve of his departure for a meeting with President Trump, that Ukraine will join NATO. He promised it, just like he promised £3 billion sterling every year for 100 years. Who does that? Who knows who's going to be running Ukraine 100 years from now? Who knows who's going to be running Britain? Who knows if either country will still exist in 100 years from now? But Starmer is very much more committed to Ukraine than he is to Britain. And I'm not entirely sure why that should be and why he's given such a free ride for being so. He cut the cold weather payments to our own old age pensioners in order to light up people in Ukraine. He took money from Britain's pensioners and gave it to Zelensky, even though the man and dog in the street knows that Zelensky and his circle are the greatest thieves of the 21st century. They keep getting caught. A low-level official in the Ministry of Defense in the Ukraine, nobody you've ever heard of, not near the top of the tree, was arrested this week with $14 million in cash. They spread it all out on the desk. Well, if that's what you're earning as a low-level official in the Ministry of Defense, just imagine the treasure in the chest of little Zelensky himself. All of that, much more, coming up. Stay tuned, it's the mother of all talk shows.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
So we're running a poll, as always. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? That's what Elon Musk called Zelensky's government. You see how bitter and sour have relations become between the US administration and Zelensky, and yet European leaders are doubling down on their commitment to him. So we are asking your opinion. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? Yes or no? You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my Twitter, my X, or on the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please make sure that you have subscribed to my channel and that you give a thumbs up to the show and share it with your friends and contacts. So getting on for 20,000 people have voted so far. Of course, as always, on all the platforms, it's overwhelmingly, yes, he is running a graft machine, but on Elon Musk's X, it's rather closer. So get voting. Why don't you? We want a representative sample. Get voting now. Now, if you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It is free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. And it is available also worldwide, 0044 203 966 2625. Professor George Szamuely, Senior Research Fellow at Global Policy Institute and author of a very fine book, Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia, which was so prescient, joins us now. Dr. George, thanks for joining us again on the show. Early to say yet, we're still dealing with exit polls, but it seems that the curse of Zelensky has struck again, but that the electorate did not have the courage to vote for a change of direction. Is that a fair summary in your view?
I think so. The AFD did pretty well. Obviously, it's a historic breakthrough. They got almost twice as many votes as in the last election, but they didn't do quite as well as they had probably hoped for, particularly after Elon Musk's intervention and all the publicity generated by that interview that he had with Alice Weidel, and then she met Vice President Vance, and all of that was somehow expected to give her party more of a boost. In the end, she kind of ended up with pretty much what she had, a couple of months ago. So I think that's the case. The Christian Democrats have not done particularly well. And, the big surprise so far of this election has been the sudden surge of the Die Linke party, the party of the left, which seemed completely dead and buried after Sarah Wagenknecht had started her own party. But Sarah Wagenknecht had so far doesn't seem to have done as well as it was expected. So you're absolutely right. It does look as if Germany was just going to continue drifting as it has been now, really for 2 decades, ever since the fall of Gerhard Schröder.
Well, the only two parties that were in the running that offered a different direction were the AFD and the Sarah Wagenknecht group. I'm closer to her, of course. But they have both done less well than they might have expected, and certainly than they might have hoped. So what we have now is a polity in Germany where if you add the Green vote to the so-called left vote of Die Linke, which is not a left vote really because it's pro-war, pro-Israel, pro-censorship, pro-attacks on free speech, pro-Zelensky, and so on. So actually the Greens and them together make about 30% of the vote. So liberalism isn't dead and of course, if you add Schulz's vote to that, it's about 45%. And the AFD and the Wagenknecht group are, well, coming in at around 35% of the vote. Merz is the new chancellor, will be the new chancellor, but can't govern on his own. What do you think he'll do next?
Well, I think he's going to try to form a coalition government with the Social Democrats. Whether that will be enough, whether there's enough there to command a majority in the Bundestag, that seems dubious, in which case he's probably going to turn to the Greens, and then essentially you're going to have exactly the same situation as you had when the so-called traffic light coalition, namely if you've got these three parties that can't really agree on anything very much, and they will just continue with the same policy on Ukraine, same policy, by the way, also on the Israel's war on Gaza, same policy also on mass migration and their inability to bring that under some kind of control. So, given what the Christian Democrats, and this goes all the way back to Angela Merkel's time, that they somehow they want to create this firewall against the AFD, it means that the Christian Democrats are always prisoners of that kind of neoliberal center-left grouping of the Social Democrats and the Greens. They can't do anything else because there's no, once they made a decision that they're not going to have anything to do with the AFD, then they have no other choice but to go to the Social Democrats and the Greens. I mean, the Free Democrats, it doesn't look like they're going to make it into the Bundestag, but you never know. They always somehow manage to creep over that 5% threshold. But essentially, nothing is going to change, which means that at some point, things are going to get really dire in Germany. Germany continues with its economic decline. Germany continues with its social decline. And this will only be a boost for the AFD because essentially the campaign for 2029 begins tonight.
Now, let's take a look at the SPD, formerly the leading socialist party in Europe. This was a party of which Rosa Luxemburg was, for a time at least, a member. This was a giant of politics not so long ago, and Schulz has taken them to their lowest vote ever. He can't stay on as leader, yes. Can he?
No, he's done. His political career is over, it's hard to see what happens now. This is 16%. 16%, as you say. This is the party of Karl Marx. This is the party of Karl Kautsky, Edward Bernstein. You go through these names of these giants of the European socialist movement, and it's now, and even in more recent times, Willy Brandt, Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schroeder. I mean, it is pathetic to collapse into this state. So yeah, this is a total failure and rejection. And you'd have to believe that this decline will continue. I think it's just going to become, one of these small parties that's sort of 5 or 6%. So I think they're finished. But the unfortunate thing, as far as I can see, the unfortunate thing is that the Greens, despite their failures of their economic policies, despite the absolutely catastrophic foreign policy pursued by Annalena Baerbock of antagonizing the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese all at one and the same time. I mean, the idea you're the foreign minister and you're antagonizing, three major powers. I mean, that's your diplomacy. And they're going to, if they are going to join the coalition, they're going to absolutely angle to continue on that job, that foreign ministry. That's the one that the Greens always want to control.
And Merz himself is a former BlackRock executive.
Yep.
Does that tell us everything we need to know about him?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he is, he has the classic profile of a Christian Democrat. He was born in North Rhine-Westphalia, comes from a very prosperous family. He's a Catholic. He has tried, I mean, this is, I think, he was his third attempt at trying to get to be the leader of the party. He was outmaneuvered by Angela Merkel. And then after he failed with Merkel, he went and made an awful lot of money. He worked as a corporate lawyer, and then he was on the board of innumerable corporations. I mean, just go through the list of all the major corporations that he served on the board of. Very, very wealthy man, absolutely extremely wealthy. And that's who he is. He's a neoliberal. He wrote a book in favor of venture capitalism. I mean, his model of capitalism is vulture capitalism. Essentially the BlackRock model. You buy up companies, you shed your workforce, and then you sell them off. I mean, that's his model of capitalism.
Well,
it's not the Germans, that's the market economy. I mean, it's definitely the opposed to what Germany used to stand for.
Well, exactly. It was once a model of kind of hybrid capitalism, and will now be a Germany where the vultures are circling. Let's take a look at the European scene as a whole, George. I'd love your take on this. I mean, Trump and Vance and Musk are going through the Europeans like a dose of salts, aren't they?
Right. They really are. Because this grouping has absolutely driven Europe into the most abject, humiliating role that it's ever had. Totally lacking any independent agency, totally lacking any kind of a distinctive foreign policy, a kind of a particularly European view of the world. They've completely, rented out their foreign policy to the United States. I mean, when they destroyed, the Americans openly boasted that they destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, and then Sergeant Schultz, I call him Sergeant Schultz, was stood there next to Biden, and he had nothing to say. Your great ally, your great liberator, and was boasting that he was basically driving your economy into the toilet. Well, if you allow yourself to be treated like a doormat, then people will take you to be a doormat. So, of course, Trump and Vance have no respect at all for Europe. And they expect Europeans to fall into line. Just do as we say, and don't start coming here with all kinds of programs of your own. No, you do as we say. And the Europeans have brought this on themselves. And the more that they complain about Trump, and Trump also remembers that many of these same leaders openly rejoiced after 2020, and some of them actually plotted against him. Like Keir Starmer sent his flunkies to campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris. Trump hasn't forgotten that, so there's absolutely going to be payback now.
But to what extent can they throw a spanner in the works? I mean, they're talking big, some bigger than others, Starmer biggest of all. But if Trump is really bent on a negotiation with Putin and an agreement with Putin over the fate of the war, to what extent can these Europeans hold an independent position and make it count?
It's very hard to say. They could, in theory, send in their own so-called peacekeepers or some, whatever forces to help out Kiev. But there's a problem there, because the Russians have said we won't accept any British, French, or NATO member states' forces, whether they come under a NATO flag or not under a NATO flag. So the Russians have said no, and the Americans have said we're not going to provide you with any support. So even if there's a lot of big talk from Keir Starmer and Macron that we're going to put in our forces, ultimately there's no one who's going to protect them. So it's hard to see what really that they can do. I mean, and they also have very limited persuasive powers with Trump. I mean, I think they think that maybe they can fly into Washington and try to worm their way in, flatter him. That's what they think. That's how you deal with Trump. Flatter him, be sycophantic, and maybe Trump will come around and start sounding a lot more like Biden than now. But I don't think that's going to work. So the only thing they can do is ultimately, if they go absolutely crazy and do something really stupid, it's not impossible. And the British and French, send in their own forces, or maybe the Canadians send in some forces. But that just seems like a completely ridiculous and doomed enterprise.
That would be war, wouldn't it, George? It would be the Russians would treat it as an act of war.
I would think that they'll treat it as an act of war, and they won't be able to do much about it because they won't be able to invoke Article 5, and they won't be able to ask America for any kind of assistance because the Americans already said, we're not going to do anything to assist you if you send in your forces. So, it's an enterprise doomed to fail. But I mean, as you were saying about Keir Starmer, I don't know what he's thinking. I really, it doesn't seem to make any kind of sense at all, any more than the things Macron has said about sending in forces into Ukraine. And he started talking about this a year ago. It never really made any sense then, but they're just wedded to this idea that somehow Ukraine is some vital national interest of theirs, even though they've never been able to explain in what way anything in Ukraine is a vital interest to either Britain or to France.
So what does it all mean for the end of the war? If you were a betting man, George, can Trump and Putin, as it were, bilaterally bring this war to an end, in your view?
I think that they can bring it to some kind of a conclusion. Basically, I think it would have to be a ceasefire along the current lines of contact, combined with some sanctions relief for Russia, combined with maybe some European security conference along the lines of Helsinki. I think that's more doubtful, but combined maybe with some economic partnerships agreements with the United States. The problem for Russia is they've had bad experiences with coming to agreements with the West. Trump isn't going to be there forever. Who knows who comes after him? If it's J.D. Vance, then that's fine. Then I think the agreement would hold. If it's somebody else, then, we're going to be along the same cycle that the West turns around and just reneges on all the commitments it's made. If I were a betting man, I think it is going to come to an end reasonably soon.
Helsinki ain't what it used to be, of course, George. Nobody would be making agreements with today's Helsinki. Thank you very much for your expertise, brilliance, actually. George Szamuely, Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. Thank you, George. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? You tell me, yes or no. I mean, it's kind of obvious to me, and it's kind of obvious to everyone except on Twitter, where it is considerably narrower. So get your vote in before the end of the show this evening. Now I'm going to take a quick break, then your calls all the way to the hour, where we've got the great Garland Nixon as our American guest. Stay tuned. Even though it has moved its mass murder campaign from Gaza, although there's still mass murdering in Gaza, of course, no day off for the poor refugees in the concentration camp of Gaza, but they have moved their killing fields to Lebanon. Lebanon, a sovereign country. Lebanon, a member of the United Nations. Lebanon, a country to which every other country in the world has diplomatic relations, has ambassadors in place, is being remorselessly bombed with hundreds and hundreds of air attacks killing hundreds and hundreds of people every day, most of them women and children. Was it ever thus? As I said the other night, put the letter H in front of any Arab child and you can slaughter them with impunity. Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, they all look the same. They all are deserving of death, violent, sudden death, delivered from American airplanes, using American missiles and bombs, with British airplanes supplying the targeting information and the offending American and British reconnaissance flights flying out of somebody else's country, namely Cyprus, and the British sovereign base there.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, let's go to Florida. Why wouldn't we on this bitterly cold and wet English evening? Eve is in Florida and he wants to talk about Russia and China because, hey, we are the global university of the airwaves. Eve, welcome back. What would you like to say?
Well, I wanted to look at the three last year a little bit. So 3 years ago, the West had two goals. The first goal was to dismember Russia, to take its wealth, its mineral wealth, and the food and all that thing. And the second is to break the relationship between China and Russia. And we are today, and it looks like we got something along those lines, except that what is broken is a relationship between Europe and the US, and that essentially Europe is getting destroyed because 3 years ago they didn't want to spend 1.5% of their budget for the defense, but now they want to take on by themselves Russia, and they want, since America is pulling back from Ukraine, they want to spend $700 billion as a Eurobond for Ukraine. So essentially, Europe is self-destroying itself alone because of Zelensky and Ukraine. But the situation is not much better for the US, unfortunately, even though they may pull out their chips from Ukraine, because America is responsible 100% for the genocide in Gaza and for the wide majority of the world. America is guilty of this crime. And to conclude, I would say that this will destroy the standing, even if economically America can do pretty well, it will destroy the standing of America in the world. And I would conclude by saying, by paraphrasing John McCain, and I would say that Israel is essentially a neo-colonial entity guilty of a genocide and masquerading as a religious sanctuary.
Well, I don't think many would disagree with that, Eve. Let me take you back, though, to the first point that you made. These Eurobonds, you know, if they were to require the European citizenry to buy Eurobonds for Ukraine, I'd have no problem with that. Because I can assure you that not many Eurobonds would be sold to the public. What, of course, they're going to do is they're going to impose on their own public an additional $700 billion in this Eurobond, which will go to a government which already cannot account for hundreds of billions. I mean, Donald Trump says that your country gave Zelensky 350 billions, and he wants 500 billions back. Zelensky says he can't even account for 100 billion. So the capacity of the Ukraine state to steal, lose, miscount, whatever it is that they are doing, is so phenomenal. It almost beggars belief that anyone should want to give them any more money. Never mind 700 billion from a European economy which is on its knees already. Last word to you, Yves.
Well, yeah, I'm going to end up by a technical point, and I don't want too much time, from your great caller on all that. But there is a misunderstanding about the euro. Euro is not a single currency. Euro has a mechanism which is called Target 2 in order to take what has been issued by the French, by the Spanish, and they put that together, and they keep accounting. And my point is that if you have 700 billion euro bond, basically it's the end of the euro, because euro is not made. They would need to have a European income tax, because they are not made to have this kind of bond on top of it. I hope I made my point clear. I'm not sure.
You have. Well, they're just going to print it, aren't they? It's just going to be quantitatively eased into existence, thus producing mass inflation across the Eurozone, isn't it?
Well, yes, but nobody will, like you say, nobody will buy it, and they will have to force that on an income tax.
Wow. More income tax for Zelensky. That'll be popular. Yves in Florida, thank you very much indeed for that call. Now, you can leave comments on YouTube by scanning the QR code on the corner of the screen now, and I'll try and read out as many as I can. Ian Foster, who won the German election? Imperialists. They still have 100% of the parliamentary seats, so no change. Jeffrey R66 says Germany has learned much from the United States of amnesia. Never underestimate the power of denial. They are suffering from irony deficiency. And Omar Rana says it's illegal to support Palestine in Germany. Indeed it is. I've seen it with my own eyes. And Terry Rose says it was genius for the right funding trans and pronoun people to create a divide in the left. Maria Youssef says, a very happy birthday to you, Mrs. Galloway. God bless you and grant you your heart's desire. Maria, how beautiful is that? Thank you very much indeed. By the way, I have challenged Boris Johnson to a public debate in the Albert Hall on the Ukraine war, because he admitted on television that it was a proxy war. He said, and I quote him, "Look, we are fighting a proxy war, but we are not giving our proxies the weapons and the wherewithal that they need." So it's come from the donkey's mouth. And I'm challenging the donkey. And I'm challenging you again right here now, Boris. You and I are both superannuated members of the British Parliament. Maybe we'll come back someday. Maybe we won't. But we have an audience, both of us. And we could fill the Albert Hall. And we could charge a good price for the tickets. You can keep your share of the ticket money, because I know that's the kind of guy you are. At least that's what Tucker Carlson said. He said you demanded $1 million to appear on his show. Well, you won't make $1 million from this debate. but you'll make quite a tidy sum. My share will go to the children in Gaza. You can do whatever you like with your share, but the public deserve a proper debate between you and me on the entire British, Ukrainian, Russian, NATO issue and track. So, unless you're a gutless coward, Boris, you'll show up for a debate with me in the Albert Hall. You could see the challenge on my Twitter feed. Please, if you are on Twitter, multiply it, magnify it, send it everywhere. Let's shame Johnson into accepting the debate. Let's take another call, this time from England, from Walter in Blackpool on Ukraine. Go ahead, Walter.
Well, yes, George. First of all, of course, I wholeheartedly agree with your analysis of the Minsk II agreement. And of course, well, here, Johnson becomes very relevant because, as you've stated on this show, the same agreement in slightly modified form was available in Istanbul in April 2022, barely a month after the invasion started. And of course, who flummoxed it? Well, it was the same flaxen-haired buffoon allegedly in charge of this country. Now, what we haven't heard, George, in the media is a sober assessment of where we are and what the possible outcomes will be of the current situation in Ukraine. Now, it seems to me there are only three options, The first option is all the territories taken by Russia in the course of this operation will be retaken by armed force, whether by NATO or anybody else. So that's the first option. The second option is a negotiated settlement that takes this reality into account. And of course, the third option is that Russia, there's no solution reached, and Russia continues its war of attrition, its gradual advance throughout Ukraine. I can't see that there is any other option. Of course, the first option, retaking all the territories taken by Russia, that is completely off the table. Nobody seriously suggests this, so that only leaves the other two options, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the choice, a negotiated settlement or a Russian victory on the battlefield. Personally, I agree with Professor George Szamuely that a negotiated settlement with people who are well-known and practiced deceivers, who are incapable and completely unwilling to be as good as their word. If I was a Russian leader who had expended the lives of so many of my compatriots on the battlefield, I'd be very wary indeed of a negotiated settlement with them. The problem is it's the poor Ukrainians that will pay the price for that, because, as you say, if the war of attrition continues, what has become an utter crisis, just this evening, in all the Western newspapers, the top brass in the Ukrainian military are declaring a crisis in frontline infantry troops, which is another way of saying so many have been lost and so few are left to be conscripted that a complete collapse of the Ukrainian line cannot be ruled out, and perhaps very swiftly indeed. The soldiers haven't spoken yet, after all, Walter. The government, such as it is in Kiev, has ruled out Trump and Putin agreeing this between them and so on, and vowed to fight on to the last Ukrainian. But the Ukrainian soldiers haven't spoken yet. And what if the moment comes when they see the possibility of an end of the war by negotiated means being smashed by the obduracy of Zelensky and his Western European allies? What happens if the soldiers rise up and say no more? After all, it's happened in that part of the world before, Walter. In 1917, to be precise. Thank you, Walter, in Blackpool. Is Zelensky running in Elon Musk's words, a graft machine, yes or no? Get voting. You've got 45 minutes to get this poll up and as representative as it can be. Now, on our website, MOATS.tv, which is getting tremendous attention from the audience. I'm very grateful to you for that, especially for those who are donating to keep the show going. So the top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website this week were Anne Hendricks, Paul Timperley, Heather Smith, Neil Macmillan, and Asnat Ajwe. I'm very grateful to each and every one of you, and everyone who has donated, and everyone who will, I'm sure, donate tonight by the end of this show. It is the fastest, cheapest, simplest way of supporting the show. Go to our own website and click and give your details, and there'll be no commission taken by anybody else, no possibility of seizure by anybody else. You'll be making a big contribution to us and to the show. It takes you a minute, by the way, I'm told, to make a donation. I hope you'll do it. Let's squeeze a call in before the break. Alan in Doncaster on Jeffrey Sachs. Go ahead, Alan.
Well, I've got a lot to tell you, George, I'm afraid. I sent you an email today to see if you knew that Jeffrey Sachs had been to the European Parliament and told them all about the Ukraine. He's just told the truth.
Yeah, he's a giant man. He's a giant of a man. Jeffrey Sachs is one of the men of our age.
Oh, right. Well, did you listen to it all? Because he told him about Netanyahu and how the Israelis are controlling the... Oh, well, I sent him... But the other thing is, what has cropped up, we can get this. You said you didn't know why Starmer's spending all this money. It's simple. Quadruple capital. They've donated £4 million, and they're just making money from all the conflicts. You can look it up. It's easy to find.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I'm sure that's an issue, but he's destroying his own party's political standing. He's having to cancel elections because he's going to lose them. He's desperate to avoid by-elections. There's a Labour MP about to be sentenced tomorrow for brutally assaulting his own constituent, punching him repeatedly on the ground. If he gets the kind of sentence he deserves, there's a by-election coming up. And that by-election, I can tell you now, will be lost. It will be lost either to us or to Reform. He's desperate to hang on to a member of Parliament who has brought the Labour Party into absolute disgrace and opprobrium. Andrew Gwynn had to be sacked as a health minister because of the vile nature of his WhatsApp group chatter, in which, inter alia, he insulted his own constituents, insulted Jews, insulted black people, insulted women, and was, in general, a font of puerile, juvenile poison. And Starmer's got to hold on to him, even though that has become a suppurating sore. It's on the front page of the Mail on Sunday again today. He can't afford by-elections because he'll lose them in a landslide. And yet he can't afford to hang on to people who are going to drag him down, like Andrew Gwynn. He's doing all that. And it ain't for £4 million donation. I'm sorry. That doesn't make any sense at all. Look, a poll update. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? 97% say yes on Telegram. 93% say yes on the YouTube community poll. 95% say yes on the YouTube stream. But on X, as usual, 60% say yes. So even NAFO, with all the bots at their disposal and all the boosting by the last ditchers, the dead enders inside X, inside the Twitter apparatus, are not able entirely to distort this poll. Coming up after a short break is the one and only Garland Nixon, radio talk show host, political analyst, and that's just half of it. He's coming up right after this. Stay tuned. Big thanks to this week's top donors who visited the new MOATS.tv website. Thank you very much, all of you. And I'm really going to make this point as firmly as I can. Every one of you has to go to MOATS.tv and donate something, even if it is £1, even if it is $1, €1. Nothing comes for free. 2 shows a week cannot be produced for free. We need every person watching to donate at least £1, $1, €1. I can't put it more clearly than that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, Garland Nixon is the savviest of all American commentators, and I'm very glad to say he joins us again now. Welcome back to the show, Garland. Let me bowl you left field, if I may, about the gold. I'm intrigued that Donald Trump keeps talking about Fort Knox. Is it going to turn out that being as safe as Fort Knox isn't actually all that safe? Is the American gold in Fort Knox? What's Trump on about?
Well, I suspect that the issue of gold is very important in the new monetary policy that Donald Trump and, of course, his very powerful and wealthy supporters are planning to make adjustments to. So, whether or not there's something, amiss in Fort Knox and whether there's not quite as much gold as there's supposed to be there, it's hard to know that. But I think it is critical. We can see that Elon Musk is looking through the Treasury. We can see that the United States government now is trying to shift from money coming in via taxes, which a lot of people don't understand this. The Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, has the power of the purse for tax dollars. If the government switches to bringing money in by tariffs, that goes into the Treasury, and there's an argument to be made that the executive then has, fairly a powerful ability to control all of that money, and it won't be as restricted by the Congress. So I think there's monetary policy being changed, and whether or not the gold is there is critical to find out how that monetary policy the new monetary policy will be enforced. So we can't really know that, but it's a big part of his plans. That's what I'm saying.
I'm sorry to dwell on it, but if I may, if it's not there, where could it be? Or have they been lying about the amount of gold that they had for some nefarious purpose?
Well, yeah, I think if it's not there, then there's going to have to be investigations done as to what happened to it over the course of time. The same way I think there's going to have to be questions about, the city of London, where their gold is and where that's disappeared to over time. I think it's an important question that has to be answered. And you also have to suspect that if the Trump people are asking that question, that maybe they already know at least part of the answer.
Exactly. So, if I understood you correctly, is that the reason why Trump's new word is tariffs? But these tariffs are paid by the consumer in the United States. I mean, if you put a 20% tariff on something I'm selling you, then you'll pass it on to your customer. So it's inflationary at a time when you can't get eggs for less than $1 each in the US.
Well, it gets pretty deep if you're chasing it down, but here's the bottom line. A tariff is actually paid at the port of entry. So when you ship goods into the U.S., whoever's shipping them in, this company will pay the tariff at that point, which will then, of course, be passed on to the consumer. However, the countries that are paying these excessive tariffs now will have to hold more dollars, which means they'll have to buy T-bills, and that means that actually there's an argument to be made that it'll strengthen the dollar. If you got to pay tariffs for everything that goes into the United States, you have to hold more dollars. And how do you get more dollars? You buy more treasury bills from the United States. Now, of course, that there's a long road you can chase that to, where eventually that can cause problems. But I think the Trump people understand that in the short term, a big part that has two effects. Number one is now the money coming into the government goes into the Treasury instead of tax dollars, and the executive branch has much more discretion over money in the Treasury than it does tax dollars, which are controlled by Congress. And number two, it's going to, at least in the short term, strengthen the dollar. So it's complicated economically. I've been chasing this down, but it isn't quite as simple as it looks.
Now, you and I are vaguely on the same political page, and we vaguely had the same attitude to one Bernie Sanders. But I saw him today talking live to a very different crowd to the crowd he used to talk to, in which he was demanding more war with Russia, more weapons into the war machine against Russia. This Bernie Sanders can't be the same man that you and I used to support, can he?
Well, he can, but I think one of the things that Americans are learning, and one of the reasons that the Democratic Party is in such a downward spiral, is that you can't. The party that is in power should be the party of the people, the party of the working class, and you cannot be the party of the working class unless you're the party of peace, particularly in a country with 900 bases and $1 trillion budget. The reason we can't have good things, as they say, which would be a strong social safety net, is because all of the money goes into war making. So the Bernie Sanders and his ilk now are demonstrating that for all of the time that they've argued that they were standing on behalf of the working class, the working poor, and the poor, they were really playing both sides of the fence, that it was all a fraud, because he would have to argue for less war and argue to lower the military budget so that money could be used for the people. And Bernie Sanders is clearly a fraud. And when it came down to it, when Bernie Sanders had to make a decision, he's been exposed.
Yeah, it's bitterly disappointing. We had him on our wall of fame, and we took him off it some time ago. But I thought his speech today marked a new low. But let's look at who's actually in power now in the United States, and the St. Valentine's Day massacre that J.D. Vance issued to the assembled European panjandrums. On the 14th of February, the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain and the European continent was effectively massacred. He could not have been more harsh to the faces of these European leaders. And now it would appear, I mean, I worked all my life for this, Garland, for an anti-American uprising in Europe. But now that there is an anti-American uprising in Europe, it's America that's right and the Europeans that are wrong. And thus, I said to my old mother, aged 90 yesterday, she said something about me, you'll not get into the United States. I said, I'm now the most pro-American political figure in the United Kingdom, which is actually more or less true. So do they mean it? What are they going to do about it? Are they going to be dissuaded by these barking poodles and chihuahuas? Or are they going really going for a peace agreement with Russia?
Well, I think we're looking at, it's kind of like when you go to dinner with a friend and his wife and you look and you realize these people are going to get divorced soon. They just can't get along anymore. You see them argue over the whole dinner. That's what we're looking at. It's interesting that the Biden administration and the neocons have been going around the world, attacking and doing all kinds of terrible things and arguing that it was our values, quote, we lead with our values. And how ironic it is that the issue of values is the actual issue that is causing the breakup between the United States and the EU. That ultimately, when it comes down to it, there are people in the United States to a large extent that are concerned with the rights of the individual and the freedoms of the individual. We may, certainly have some significant disagreements with them, particularly when it comes to economic policy. But yet and still, there are people that say, we shouldn't. That government overreach is an issue. And to be quite frank, there is the appearance from this side of the pond that Europe is descending into this kind of a woke liberal totalitarianism, and it's quite distasteful. And we cannot continue to be, strongly culturally associated with Europe based on the direction that Europe is going, and we're going in an opposite direction, returning more to our kind of roots, I would say.
So does a summit happen and Trump agrees with Putin, a settlement, whether the Ukrainian regime and its Western European allies like it or not, and that's the done deal?
Well, recently, President Trump, I think it was yesterday at the CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee, he gave a speech and he teased, and his others in his administration have teased that they may expect a settlement as early as this week. I think the important thing to remember is that as a result of, ironically, as a result of going along with the Biden administration, cutting themselves off from cheap Russian energy and other very important necessary resources that Europe needs from Russia, the United States has considerably more leverage over the European countries than it had prior to the start of the conflict. So that Donald Trump, being a person that will use leverage if he has it, he can put enough leverage, I believe, economically on the European leaders to force them to either go in the direction that he wants or virtually crash their countries. I mean, if he simply says, we're not, all of these things that you get from us, all of these things that you sell to us will be cut off. And furthermore, we have friends that you get, Algeria and Qatar, that you're still getting gas from. We'll talk to our friends and cut all of that up. He has the leverage if he chooses to use it to force Europe into compliance. The question, I think, is will the goons in Ukraine, are they actors that can be dealt with? What do you do with the people in Ukraine that are irrational and are, let's face it, neo-Nazis? So, but I do think that Europe can and will be forced into compliance. We're already seeing at the CPAC meeting, the leader of Duda, I believe, president or prime minister, whatever, of Poland was there. I believe President Fico was there. The leader, Prime Minister Maloney, spoke there. So we can see that there are people already jumping off the sinking ship of the EU, and I think it's just a matter of time before the rest of them get pressed into compliance, shall we say.
The Polish leader, Dudek, waited for an hour and a half and got a 10-minute meeting with Donald Trump. I mean, even I'm expecting a 10-minute meeting with Donald Trump, and I'm not the president of anywhere. I'm going to the victory celebrations in Moscow in May. Will I really be rubbing shoulders with Donald Trump, standing on top of Lenin's tomb, reviewing the victory parade on May the 9th in Moscow? Is Trump really going to go there? That would be a very big step.
Well, Donald Trump recently has said that he won't be going there, but I wouldn't rule it out because, I mean, the presidents say that for instance, they're not going to pardon their sons, and then that happens. So, Donald Trump is saying now, he has said that he wants a deal by Easter, and interestingly enough, the traditional, I don't know what you call it, Easter and the Orthodox Easter both fall on the same day this year. So I suspect that he's looking for a deal soon, and that those things could change. Donald Trump, to be standing up front with President Trump, President Putin, and President Xi, who Trump recently referred to as his good friend, I think is a temptation of power that Donald Trump will find very, very, very difficult to resist and turn down.
Yeah, and he could even meet me there. It would be marvelous to see him. Finally, I see that Russia hasn't gone away. You would have thought that after the Hunter Biden laptop being exposed as both true and having been the subject of a high-level deep state cover-up, one of the biggest scandals in American history, involving 50 top intelligence people saying it was Russian propaganda and so on, only for it to turn out to be true. The Mueller inquiry producing zero, the Steele dossier producing zero. It hasn't gone away. I saw someone the other day, a former so-called NSA chief in Kazakhstan, who's presumably on the USAID payroll, singing for his supper, saying that the Russians recruited Donald Trump in 1987 when he was a real estate developer. It just shows you the KGB must have been very far-sighted people indeed. They recruited him and even gave him a code name. He's Agent Krasnov. So some call him President Trump. He'll always be Agent Krasnov to others. Does anyone take that seriously anymore?
No, it's kind of sad, and it's really, really embarrassing, and it just shows the level of desperation that the anti-Trump neocons have come to. I mean, there are plenty, as you know, as left-leaning people, we have plenty of areas where we could make legitimate criticisms of Donald Trump, and certainly in the things that he does that we agree with, we certainly support those. Some things that I think are great as far as foreign policy, but these people are so embarrassing. The good thing is that for the most part, they're on CNN or MSNBC, and since nobody's watching those channels anyway, if we don't discuss it on your channel, nobody would even know that it happened.
I stand chastened by that very wise advice. Garland Nixon, as always, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Absolutely brilliant. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? Yes or no? Get your votes in before, well, let's say we'll give you 20 minutes to get your votes in. Let's take a break. Then it's your calls right up to the birthday girl, Gayatri, with the social media roundup. From a mystery location she is tonight. Can't tell you where. See you. I'll be right back. On the line is a Rose in Texas. I was at the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show. And I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Let's go to Mohammed in Canada on Trump. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Yes, Mr. Galloway. It's not just Trump. I just want to let you know the public knows about the Trump policies. He's talking about evening trades with every other country, even talking about Ukraine. But what he forgets to mention was Israel. The Americans are still sending billions and billions of aid in the form of weapons to Israel.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you include Israel in it? You know, in as much as everybody's right about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, everybody knows that the Ukrainians, it's not even the Ukrainians, the Americans and British started this war, you know? So that's one. And then also again, you're talking about debating Mr. Boris Johnson. And I don't want you to waste your time on those kind of people like Piers Morgan, Boris Johnson, Netanyahu. They all have the same tendencies. They're all narcissists. When you look at the things they talk about and how they twist things and try to blame other people for their problems, you know for a fact that these people have no soul in them. Like the other day, I was listening to Piers Morgan. No, let me just finish this. I was listening to Piers Morgan when the Wi-Fi was happening in California. The first thing the guy is talking about is himself. Like, try to put it himself there. Oh, I have a house in Beverly Hills. You know, this and that and that and that. You're not talking about the people that have lost their homes. You're trying to just, you know, like, same thing with Netanyahu. Netanyahu, like, people don't even know him. Like, his dad was a Polish Zionist. He was, like, so, like, it's nothing, you know, it's difficult to explain because, like, people don't do their research and the mainstream media hide all these things from people, right? Like, take, for example, now the peace deal they have in Gaza. Yesterday, the Palestinians, Hamas, fulfilled their obligation. And then now, these people were waiting for their loved ones that have been put in jail. What happened? They didn't see them. Nobody said a word.
No, it
Nobody
wasn't
said,
even
no
reported.
Western leader, even the mainstream media, none of them. Nobody's saying anything.
It wasn't even reported. That's right. Mohammed, I need to go to California now, but let me respond to the first part of what you said. I'm not often accused of not talking about Palestine and Gaza enough, and I have, if you check the back catalogue of the last few weeks since Trump was elected, I have made pretty significant attacks on Donald Trump's plans for Gaza, which he now says he's not in any rush to implement. It may turn out that it was all just hot air. But our policy is this: where Trump is right, we support him. Where Trump is wrong, we oppose him. We no longer accept the false dichotomy of Democrat, Republican, left, right. Where something is right, we support it. Where something is wrong, we oppose it. Everything else you said is correct, except this. If I get a debate in the Albert Hall with Boris Johnson on Ukraine, not only will every single seat be filled by paying customers, but there'll be a black market in tickets outside, and there will be hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, watching online. I think that's important. Whether you think I'm wasting my time with them is another matter. I never think that reaching large numbers of people, and in this case, making a large amount of money for the children in Gaza, is a bad thing. But thanks, Mohammed. Alex is in California, but on Lebanon. Go ahead, Alex.
Thank you, Mr. George Galloway. Well, I should say Honorable George Galloway. I've been a big fan in last 20 years.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to make brief comments, sir, if I may.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much for your kind words. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. This is with regard to our folks in Lebanon. I believe that whatever happens to us, we have a big role in that. What I mean is, if we recall, not long ago, Iran sent fuel to Lebanon to help our Lebanese folks.
Yeah.
Right now, if we walk in Lebanon and talk to our folks in Lebanon, you see majority of folks are against Iran and resistance, without considering that what is happening to them is coming directly from elements that are creating chaos and bad economy in their country.
Sure.
Resistance is getting suppressed. Resistance is they're trying to get rid of the resistance in Lebanon. And that is totally wrong. We need to feel a bit nationalist attitude.
Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, I'll tell you what, Alex. It didn't look. By the way, I'll be, God willing, in California speaking in Anaheim in September, in late September, after the Labor Day holiday. So look out for that. If you are anywhere near it, come along and see me there. And of course, they're trying to marginalize and divide and discredit the resistance. But the footage I saw of the Sayed's funeral today, it doesn't look like they've been very successful. 1.4 million people at a funeral with Israeli bombers overhead who could have dropped their payload on the heads of the people at the funeral. That's bravery, but it's also big, big, big numbers. The resistance hasn't gone away, and it will not go away, in my opinion. Thanks, Alex. Ramplens01 says Elon Musk had the opportunity to speak and ask about Gonzalo Lira for a long time, but kept quiet. Now he's using him as a political card. Shame on Musk. Well, look, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. I'm glad that he's now raising it. Even though, of course, as I said in my monologue, he definitely should have raised it when it might have saved Gonzalo's life. Charlotte Burns, her message has just disappeared. I'll come back to it. David is on the line in England, in Swindon, on Ukraine. Go ahead, David.
Hello, it's me again. Yeah,
Hi.
We've spoken
Welcome.
loads of times.
Always welcome.
I want to take you back a little bit. You remember, must be 4 years ago, we spoke when the pipeline got blown up.
Yeah.
We spoke about millions and billions. Do you remember the difference between a million and a billion in seconds?
It was good. It was very good. It's a really telling statistic. Yeah, go ahead.
11 days centuries. But think of a trillion. That's 1,000 billion, which is what Zelensky and America and all the scientists agree is what they've got in rare earths and rare minerals in Ukraine.
Yeah, although most of them are now under the control of the Russian army.
Okay. So let's go back to when it wasn't. Let's go back 5-7 years.
Yeah.
Why? But the thing that's puzzling me is, with all that wealth, which far outweighs all the sunflower seeds. And why didn't Zelensky start to mine it and process it? He wouldn't need our support then. He'd be probably one of the richest countries in the world.
He could be sending us money, Dave.
Absolutely. So, we're talking about trillions.
Yeah.
So that's my
I'll
thought.
tell you my honest opinion. I believe they have exaggerated their rare earth mineral deposits, possibly exponentially. But in any case, the vast majority of Ukraine's mineral wealth, and indeed its coal industry, its steel industry, and its heavy industry generally, and the majority of its agricultural wealth, are all going to end up in what we'll call as yet undefined part of Russia. Thanks, Dave, for that. Nestor, my screen is jumping around rather a lot. Let me get back to Charlotte Burns's message. Elon Musk should know he is running a graft machine. He expects to loot the Ukrainian people of their rare earth minerals. And David Rogers says Boris refused to be interviewed by the BBC in the 2019 general election, so it's unlikely he'll take you up on your offer. Well, if he's a man at all, he will. If he's less than a man, yeah, he might refuse. Sabata says, I'm just surprised that with Musk leaning towards fascism, he'd be mad at Zelensky, whose troops include far-right militias. Anyway, well, he is against them. Sing hallelujah for that. Clint says Germany went from hating Jews to hating everyone the Jews hate. Like Nestor in Maryland in the United States is up next because he disagrees with Garland, and I want to know why. Go ahead, Nestor.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. George Galloway. My main disagreement with Mr. Garland, I subscribe to him too, and I listen to him a lot. But when it comes to this, because his argument basically is that, there's a master plan with these tariffs that they'll force other countries to buy more dollar bonds and hold more dollars. This is just basically United States thinking that's going to intimidate its way out of debt, which hasn't worked for the past 20 years. I've been growing. I remember since 9/11, when I was in 7th grade, I've seen this country invade country after country, occupy Iraq, destroy Libya, just going all over the place, flexing its muscle, flexing its strength. And none of that has helped to prevent the situation it finds itself right now, where it's almost at $37 trillion in debt. There's apparently now there's trouble in how much money how much gold there might actually be in Fort Knox. So there's another question there. So there seems to be just more of a gambler at the casino where they're just desperate to win that last big win, and they're just hoping that the House is too dumb to give them a blessing to give them a win again. But to me, they just look like a desperate gambler that's going for broke, and there is no master plan. They're just flinging everything they can at the wall and hope something sticks, I think you're absolutely right for what it's worth, Nestor, in Maryland. Thanks for that call. Now, a big thanks to tonight's big donors. In the last hour of the show, you've donated in your dozens. Thank you especially to Carol J. Hammond, Darren Henry, Will Clark, Jean-Paul Gianfreda, and Imad Garavi. I really take my hat off to you. These are exceptional and extremely generous donations. I'm really grateful to you. To the rest of you, I'm kind of demanding $1, £1, €1. If you're not actually supporting us through my Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway, if you're not doing that and you're not donating on the website, then you're taking a free ride. And the consequence of that free ride could very well be the disappearance of the midweek show.
And I don't think you want that. So I'm deeply grateful to the big donors, like the ones I've just mentioned, but everybody else has to give $1, has to give £1, has to give €1, or we'll go out of business. We'll go out of business midweek, that is for sure. Now, here's the poll result. Is Zelensky running a graft machine? On Telegram, yes, 97. On the YouTube community poll, yes, 93. On the YouTube stream, yes, 94. And despite the best efforts of the robots, it is on X, yes, 60%. So an overwhelming majority of the people agree, as it happens, with Elon Musk, at least in that regard, that Zelensky is running a graft machine. Let's go to London and talk to Ollie on the United States. Go ahead, Ollie. What do you want to say?
Yes, hi, George. I just wanted to say, I routinely see people come on your show and say that America is in decline. I think that is not true. Like, there's no evidence to suggest that. If you look at all the social media companies, all the tech companies, they're all American, whether it be Google, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Instagram. You still have the soft power of Hollywood. And now further looking into the future, looking at AI, all the companies behind it, whether it be NVIDIA, whether it be Microsoft, whether it be OpenAI, or the only other one that is Chinese is DeepSeek, and also TikTok. Every other, for all the inventions and the new inventions that are coming, are all driven by American companies. So when people say, so when people say it's going to decline, I say, look at the evidence. All the growth, all these companies, they're all American. They're all American. Uber, Airbnb, Apple. These are all American companies, and they're always going to project American power. America may not be the richest economy in the world or most successful, but the idea that it's declining, that's why I think people are not looking at the evidence, because it's like you look at the Silicon Valley and all the investments that have been creating. That allows America to if you say Europe is in decline, that's a different thing, because no new investors are coming from Europe. But saying America is in decline, I don't think that bears the evidence.
I think you're half right. You're half right in this sense. Mao Zedong was completely wrong in the 1960s when he called America a paper tiger. It's not even a paper tiger now, 50 years later. It's still a tiger, but it's lost a lot of teeth. And there are a lot of new tigers in the jungle. And they're more lithe, and they have greater future ahead of them than the United States does. I think you're quite wrong when you say all the new inventions are coming from the United States, not least in AI. The DeepSeek has just beaten the pants off the entire American AI effort. And it was trumped 2 days later by the Alibaba AI vehicle. China has just tested successfully a 1,000 kilometer an hour train, vacuum transport, 1,000 kilometers an hour, faster than an aeroplane, a train. Now, the United States trains, I don't need to tell you, are lucky if they stay on the track. Lucky if the bridge they go over doesn't collapse underneath them. The idea that America is not declining militarily is, of course, completely false. The ragged-arse Taliban in their sandals with their Kalashnikovs sent the United States packing like a thief in the night, leaving billions of dollars, $7 billion worth of military hardware and material behind them, which the Taliban are now enjoying. The Taliban are now flying around in Black Hawk helicopters, driving around in American tanks and APCs. completely replenished their armory with American weapons, so much so that Trump is asking for them to give it back. And of course, the Taliban don't seem enthusiastic about giving it back. So a country that can't beat the Taliban is a country that is in military decline. But the most spectacular example of American decline is that the United States spent the last years trying to defeat Russia on the Ukrainian battlefield, using Ukrainian bodies, lives, as a proxy, and completely failed. That looks like military decline to me. The rise of the BRICS means a commensurate decline in the United States. The rise in the amount of trade being done in local currencies between members of the BRICS represents an American decline. So you're half right in that it's foolish in the extreme to write off the United States. But the only thing the United States is really good at is destroying things. You say it's soft power in Hollywood. Hollywood is just about on its knees. Most films in the world are not made in Hollywood. And those that are made in Hollywood, 3 out of every $4 spent on film in Hollywood are Chinese dollars. China just produced an animation which became, overnight, the biggest animated film of all time. When I go to Netflix now, I'm choosing between Swedish films, Italian films, British films, Russian films, Chinese films. Hollywood has never been less influential than it is today. Apart from anything else, most film dollars go in direct onto Netflix, bypassing Hollywood entirely. So American soft power is at an all-time low. Who believes what comes out of the American mass media? Who believes Radio Free America or whatever it's called? Nobody believes these things. Even when they pay through USAID for soft power, that soft power doesn't add up to a row of beans when the ball is on the slates, as we say in Glasgow, as the Americans recently found out in Georgia, as they found out earlier in Kazakhstan, as they will find out when this is all over in the Ukraine. The American soft power is a fraction of what it was in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, you're right about the fact that the great engines of social media are owned by Americans. But Elon Musk is a very different kind of American. The policy that he is currently punting, particularly in relation to Ukraine, but also, I believe, in relation to Iran, also, I believe, in relation to China and to Russia, is a very different American policy to the one that we have experienced over the last period. But thanks, Ollie, for a great call. I'm cutting you short only because we're running out of time. Great call. Don't be shy of calling back again. Terence is in Corby on my debate with Boris Johnson. He's always worth hearing. What's up, Tel?
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. And as soon as you said that, I thought, well, boxing, what is it like? I haven't looked at boxing for perhaps 35 years, seen two great boxers in the last 35 years. What they live on now is fresh air and nonsense. There are a few good boxers about, but the publicity involved in getting that fight to market is where they spend their money. That's the first point. I don't like liars, I don't like cheats, and you are neither of those. Regarding Mr. DeFefa Johnson, whichever name he chooses to use, I would like to suggest that if you're going to have a debate, you have a raffle ticket on the way in, and you can win a JCB, perhaps, if you get the winning raffle ticket, because I think there's more chance of that happening than him coming to debate you, because any man that hides in a refrigerator, I think, is alien to things called truth and light. And he could have stopped the whole shebang in the Ukraine in his tracks, but was told not to for some insane reason. And as a result, Russians and Ukrainians have perished. The person I don't want to comment it on, but you're not a liar and a thief. That's all I'll say with regards to that. We need publicity on this. And
I mean, of course, I agree with you. I've always regarded him as an utterly reprehensible creature, but he still has a big public. And as to why he would agree to debate with me, well, he's out of Parliament now. So am I. He needs platforms like the debate I'm offering him in the Albert Hall. Some think, I've seen it on here, some think he would beat me in the debate. But you mention boxers. You can make a choice in a fight like I'm proposing, a debate with someone like Boris Johnson. You can dance like Ali. You can remorselessly jab your way through 15 rounds like Marciano. But if Boris Johnson turns up, he should know that you'll be facing the Mike Tyson of political infighting when he faces me. Thanks, Terence. Now, you know I've got another show called Have It Out with Galloway. I'm making another one tomorrow. It'll go out on Tuesday on my YouTube channel at 7 o'clock. Here's how you can be on it. Watch this. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Be on the studio wall. Participate in the debate about the greatest issues of our time. This is the place where we tackle the world's biggest problems and offer some of the world's best answers. You can have your say. Write to me at our website at haveitoutwithgalloway.com and join me here in the studio audience.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Like Sarah Wagenknecht may have made it over the 5% barrier. We'll see when the final votes are counted. But first, a legend, Erebos in New York, on Britain and Germany. Erebos, you're always welcome. What would you like to say tonight?
Greetings and salutations, Mr. G.
Thank you.
The Honorable Galloway clan, the fantastic MOATS staff, and the MOATS International family. I was listening to you talk about Bojo the Clown, and you're correct. On one hand, I agree with the caller. Why waste energy? Why waste life energy on putrid, incorrigible characters like Piers 65, Morgan, and this other Bojo the Clown. But in reality, on the other side of it, you're actually reaching out to their audience, right? If you give them a flaying, you put them on the rack and stretch them out a bit, and his audience would come to see that what they're not being exposed to. Many of them don't want to be exposed to it, which segues into my primary reason for calling. Stellar guests, by the way, both veterans,
both
Dr.
great,
Szamuely and Garland was, man, they were on it tonight or today, where I am still. I wanted to spend a little while speaking about the populations of both, the United Kingdom, the former Great Britain, and Germany, right? And not exclusively them, right? It's a common phenomenon. But in Europe, it seems, or Europe affiliated, it seems that these two populations in particular, they seem to be too polite for their own good, You know, and then there's the problem of adaptation, where it's like a plantation. Right? On a slave plantation, many of the slaves adapted to that, and they taught their children to adapt to it, so it became normalized, right? And when you become normalized in a situation of institutional oppression and top down, because half of the pressure comes from the oligarchy, the primitive accumulation, wealth parasites, and their dogs, which are the politicians. They attack dogs and otherwise. It comes from that's half of the problem, or 180% of it. The other 100% of it comes from the population. Yeah. And you've said it yourself. No one can push you around if you put a stop to it. You start with a shove, then it goes to a slap, then they beat you up. Then, once they see you're willing to take anything, eventually you're in permanent servitude, or they just kill you. And in Germany's case, they always circle back to their fascism. They always have that as a go-to. All they're missing is a little guy screaming off a balcony with a funny mustache or whatever. I wanted to get that off, because we know who the oligarchy is. We know who they are.
Yeah,
but our responsibility to fight back.
As Bob Marley said, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but yourself can free your mind. That's the point you're making, isn't it?
Indeed, absolutely, indeed. I think people are locked into fear.
Yeah.
Please, go on.
No, we are not emancipating ourselves. We're voting for our jailers. We had a chance in Britain in July. The Germans had a chance today, but they didn't take it. They voted for, or stayed at home and didn't vote at all, for more of the same. I mean, in the German case, it is spectacular. They have effectively voted for a continuation of the very policies that have laid Germany low. Its economy, its society, all the divisions, all the greenery and quackery and wokery, it's about to continue for another parliamentary term. So, what can you do? You can only offer an alternative, provide it, argue for it, agitate, organize for it, educate people for it. That's all you can do. And that's what I'm trying to do. And we hope soon, Erobos, that you'll have a regular slot on this show. A kind of letter from America, from New York. Thanks, Erobos, for that call. I can't keep the birthday girl waiting from a mystery location. Well, Gayatri, they say never ask a man his salary, a woman her age, or a Ukrainian what his grandfather did in the war. So I'm not going to ask you your age, but I'm sure everyone will join me. I'm wishing you a very happy birthday. Thanks for breaking off from the important family work duties that you were doing to give us a social media roundup. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Well, when you asked, is Zelensky running a graph machine? Interestingly, it didn't translate well across the board. And so people were making assumptions, thinking it had to do with the horticulture machine. Monica Range, however, replies correctly, yes, a total grift. What I don't understand is why the regular populace in the EU, who before the intervention knew that Ukraine was the most corrupt country in Europe, if not the world, all of a sudden forgot about this. I mean, we've all seen the headlines across all the mainstream media, from the BBC to the CNN, how corrupt Ukraine and its leadership is. But no, it's all yesterday. It's actually all buried. We are meant to forget about it and still look after Zelensky. I thought it was so funny when Piers Morgan came into defense of Zelensky, saying that despite everyone throwing you towards the fire, I will still stand by you, Zelensky.
Yeah, but I mean, you and I were looking at an opinion poll the other day, which, if not falsified, and it might be, because polls get falsified. I mean, if they can steal elections, if they can rig elections, they can definitely rig an opinion poll. But if not falsified, only 20% of the British people prioritized good relations with the United States, compared to almost 70% who prioritized relations with Zelensky and Ukraine. Now, if that's not falsified, that is so insane that you must despair at the public, because Ukraine means nothing to us linguistically, culturally, historically, economically, militarily. It means nothing to us. And the United States has always meant a lot to us, but only 20% of the people polled cared more about our relations with the United States compared to 70% for our relations with Zelensky. So actually, Piers Morgan, I'm sorry to say, is not on his own in this. It turns out that there are a lot of sheep who are still bleating, even though it might end up on the back of a truck headed for the knacker's yard, heading for the slaughterhouse. What else have you got for us, Gayatri?
Well, the reason for that might be, as Moore puts it, Hollywood always has subtle anti-Russian, anti-Iran, anti-communism propaganda and pro-USA military in them making CIA look like a job that's a good one. People wanting to be like Jason Bourne and Bond. And that's true, isn't it? During the Cold War, the enemy was very clear. Now that the Cold War has passed, in that sense, all the Hollywood production, they come up with pretend or made up entities and countries, but they subtly give away this anti-Russian, anti-Iran, anti-communism propaganda.
Yeah. Well, the series we're watching at the moment, Night Agent, is exactly that. By the way, if I was Donald Trump, I'd get somebody to watch Night Agent for me, especially the first series. Gayatri, I can't take you for chips tonight, but I promise to do so tomorrow night. Thanks very much for that social media roundup. I have to leave you now because there's a legend on the line. It is the original legend. It's Norma in Bristol with the last word. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. It's just a little comment at the end of the show, because, as you know, the Pope, he may not live for much longer. And he dedicated his life, really, for a better world. And he's tried to promote peace. And I just thought, wouldn't it be nice if he could die in peace, just knowing that the world had become a better place? That's really my comment, George.
Amen. Pray for the recovery of the Pope, but he seems to be fading. He's in a critical condition. As you just saw on the screen there, Gayatri and I had a private audience with him last summer. And he was extremely delighted to see her Palestine nail painted in the Palestinian colors. He beamed at that. Throughout the Gaza emergency, he called his flock in Gaza, of whom there are many. He called the Catholic Church in Gaza every single night at 7 o'clock in the evening. He spoke for the Palestinian people over and over again, although inside the College of Cardinals, inside the hierarchy, inside the church, inside the base of the church, inexplicably to me, there is a very considerable pro-Israel lobby. And one of the reasons why many particularly American Catholics, have taken against Pope Francis is his stance on Palestine and his opposition to the great crimes that have been committed there. His understanding that Jesus was a Palestinian and that his duty was to be Jesus' vicar on earth. And so I'm praying for him. I hope everyone else will. And be sure there are powerful forces at work trying to make sure that the next Pope, whoever he is, will not be admiring Gayatri's Palestinian colours on her nail, if you get my drift. Thank you, Norma, for that. The Pope is hanging on, but is hanging on with great difficulty and may indeed pass over to the other side sometime between now and Wednesday, when I come back with the midweek edition of the mother of all talk shows. So I'll be on air on Tuesday at 7 o'clock with Have It Out with Galloway, and on Wednesday at 7 o'clock with the mother of all talk shows. God willing, of course, because God decides everything in the end. Well, I'm off to meet my good wife on this, her birthday. But it's not worth me trying to tell you what age she is. Bye.